Start our conversation.
Yeah.
Welcome in this cafe. Here, together with Andrew and Babak, we initiated this place of meeting, talking, and sharing our practices in the format of, like it is called, a walk, listen cafe, bringing in a topic about walking or listening, and inviting a guest speaker tonight. This is Claire Hind, uh, who will share with us her stories and her the work about Uncanny. This is a cafe, so my role will be to be a good bartender and to keep the conversation going if needed. You're much invited to bring in your own experiences, your own stories, your own practices. As in a cafe, it is not meant just to listen, but as well to share and to talk all together. So to hear a lot about and from you as well tonight, after Claire has introduced the topic to discuss. The, feel as well free to go to come and go whenever you like. The door is open. The, um, we keep talking till the last man or woman is standing, but that doesn't oblige you. Maybe somebody is waiting for you at home, so go whenever you feel like. The, but to start with, thank you, Claire, for being with us.
Thank you.
It's nice to see you again.
Nice
Um,
to see you.
and I'll let you open this conversation.
Thank you. So I'm Claire Hind, and I'm delighted that I've been invited. I hope you don't mind, but the best way for me to engage this evening, for me to try and explain what it is that I'm doing and the conversations I'd like to have, is to just probably talk for 15 minutes, just to give an overview of the things I've been doing and share some slides with you. Andrew has very kindly explained that this is a horizontal event, but I'm also aware that that is open to interpretation, and to trying to figure out what that is. So this is my first cafe with you guys. So I hope it's okay if I talk for the first 15 minutes and then I will open it out. And I'm the sort of person that I'm a little bit excited about sharing this with you, but I am really honest, and I'm not trying to claim anything new here. I'm just sharing with you what I'm currently thinking and what I'm doing and how the pandemic has affected change for me. Um, for me, I think it'd be really important to hear from you and the projects that you're doing as well. But I thought I would start with this thing I'm in at the moment, where I'm at, where I've been, what's happening for me next, and as a way of connecting across some of the worlds that I've introduced and then hearing about yours. So if that's okay, I'll start. To just be aware that I might just talk at you for 15 minutes, and I hope that's okay. So I'm going to share some slides, so bear with me while I share the screen. And Babak, if you need to interrupt me at any time as the host, please do. I'm just learning how to share my screen. It says I'm sharing it, so bear with me while I get my PowerPoint up. Play from the start. Right, so I've written something, and it's sort of loosely written from a few different things that I've put together in the past, but also thinking forward to the future. So this is my parents, my mum and dad. I'm sat in the middle, aged 8, and hiking in the mountains of North Wales was a weekly ritual for our family. We were engaged in it no matter what the weather. And the mountains and their natural environment, a kind of smell, a kind of presence, and it was really important to me, this sort of presence as a child. It was comforting, as too were the sounds of nature and also the feel of the rock. And I think all of these sentient experiences gave me a sense of belonging. Yet there was also at the time, and I remember this very vividly, a comfortable unknowingness, something I'd not yet met, something I couldn't quite grasp, and it's hard for me to put into words, but it was very real. But I knew it was always present. It was strangely familiar, but also very distant, unattainable, in fact, out of reach, but present. And this is what I always feel when I'm out walking in the mountains, particularly when I was a child. Um, and I suppose I've always identified as a walker and done lots of different walking projects because I was so sort of intrigued by these walks that I had with my family. But about the same time in my life, at the age of 8, I began having vivid dreams, and I dreamt that I was having breakfast with my mum, and there was a knock on the door, and I opened it, and there was a giant gorilla at the door standing there, and the giant gorilla just picked me up and took me away. And years later, I made walking performances that related directly to this experiences of the giant gorilla. And this is me as the figure of Kong Lear, as I was known for a while. Who featured as many as a character, a figure in many walking performances in and around York, in New York, different places in Europe that we've taken this project to, myself and a collaborator called Gary Winters. And but the main performance that we created was called Dream Yards, and it was an ambulatory performance taking the audience through a walk through the city as if they were on a lucid dream experience. And for many years as a walking artist, I've written and performed for what I would call charged spaces, imagined territories that establish some of the world that coexists within our real world, where the everyday meets an experience of the uncanny. But for me, the uncanny is absolutely felt. It's experience. It's hard to concretize, impossible to pin down. But nevertheless, it's encountered in the senses, and it arrives in many different forms. So you can hear it in performance too. And it's a strange, unfamiliar knowingness, a paradox hard to describe. Lots of people call it the strange and the eerie, but I think there are many other terms that we should be using for this feeling, because it always sort of shifts into psychoanalysis when you start to talk in those terms. And I think it's something that we could be unpacking a little bit further. Because for me, the uncanny when I'm walking fleets back and forth between, the sounds that you heard on a walk in your childhood to all those things that you don't know that are yet to come on a walk, the things that you've not yet encountered. And that is a really interesting space for me. The sort of past and the future collide with this presence of walking. But I do understand that the word the uncanny relates for some people, or quite a lot of people, to this sense of horror. Or unsettling feeling, but I'm sort of not talking about that negative space so much, because in a way I've sort of learnt to understand that my dreams might not really be nightmares, but they might be quite creative experiences for me to play with. So in a way, all of my uncanny relationships I've sort of worked with relate to playfulness. I am a playful sort of being, and for me to be playful tests the limits of something. We play to sustain an experience, and for me also playing encourages humour. The humorous sentiment doesn't mean I'm interested necessarily in comedy, but there's some form of humorous sentiment to the work I find myself in. The gorilla is certainly kittenish or mischievous. Yeah, I do take play seriously, and I don't sort of believe in gimmicks, even though we've got a gorilla here. There is no gimmicks. It's the experience is not ironic, it's sincere. There's a sincerity to it. So I've understood play as both an activity and a state of mind, and more recently a way of being with play, as I would like to sort of develop further in my research and my practice, really, with this idea of connecting playfully with the non-human. I'll explain a little bit more of that in a moment. Because we can't reach our dreams, we can only recall them. And for a long time now, my research has circled around this idea of recalling them with and through gatherings of people, through walking experiences. And as a walking artist working with lots of audiences in city spaces, Gary Winters and I developed a way of tuning into the environment that we were working in. We would call this a form of artistic mediumship, channeling the personality of the city or the forces outside of performance, the things that are out of our control, normal life operating in the city at night, for example. And thinking like this allowed the audiences and the participants' dreams to occupy the spaces alongside the haunted matter, which in places like York it's full of, because we have history of ghost tours and ghost walks, and you can't escape the sort of haunted matter of the streets. And it's a common phenomena in many cities, I think, with a medieval history. So we spent much time in the cities sort of trying to understand the space through listening, seeing, feeling and knowing, particularly its pace, its rhythms, its rituals and spatial qualities. And the more time we spent, the more we began to recognise the flow of its pedestrian traffic and its residents' habitual routines. And that in turn allowed us to tune into the human geography, but also to the non-human elements, the changing light at night and the wildlife, its sounds, the city sounds at night, the underbelly along with the rats. And we were fully tuned into the uncanny qualities all around us. And we were sensory appendages, that's a phrase that we classed, we used a lot, that psychically picked up on the multiple worlds that surrounded us on the walk, stuff happening in the yards or movements in the snickets and those darker, less frequented spaces hidden in the city behind the back of a nightclub. And this perception inevitably relates to our own memories as artists of hanging out in those sites. The more we hung out, the more we imagined and played with the ideas. So this deep play experience meant that we could listen, look, feel and know very perceptively the city's many currents and flows moving all around. And the effects of creative channeling worked when our audience during the performance were invited to imagine coincidences, regardless of them being there or not, and you invite them to desire. And in those moments, the things that are going on around the city suddenly pop up as if by magic, and they were sort of orchestrated into our scripts that we were creating. But we got used to this, we got into the groove of this type of work. But then the pandemic came, and of course things change, and everybody's had to change. And literally I had to shift, we all had to shift when the world was put on it seemed like it was put on hold. It's a really difficult way to describe it because everybody's experienced this pandemic differently. I accept that. So whilst we had to adapt to a new way of being, the restricted movement required artists to rethink the way that we were working, and certainly with audiences. And all of the collaborative works that I was in the process of making were sort of either the thought of them ending was actually quite a unsettling thing. So we were trying to rethink them, what it could mean online. And I decided to write scripts for podcasts with my collaborators, finding ways to keep some sentiment of what we had before and acknowledging what we'd lost. So I'd worked with Gary Winters on creating scripts for podcasts for a surrealist series called 2224. And we'd never sort of done this work before. So we were writing scripts for an imaginary audience, a listening audience. And this was a new world for us. But we worked with correspondents in different parts of the world. We invited colleagues that we'd worked with in the past or colleagues that we want to work with in the future to go out on a walk and experience a walk in their neighbourhood and bring back information about that walk, which we would then weave into some sort of playful, uncanny narrative. So, for example, there's a protagonist in each episode. Most of them have some form of out-of-body experience or otherworldly experience. Some defy gravity, others fall from the sky. I mean, they're all walking. And I suppose in a way it was like an experience of walking and dreaming, only this time we started to think a little bit more philosophically about the walking story itself and what is possible from a listening experience about somebody that goes on a walk. I'll just read out some examples of these. So one of the episodes is called Walking and Resilience, or the theme is about walking and resilience. And it's a journey a protagonist has from Xiamen to Shapaway in China. And and we ask what is a relationship between walking and resilience. And this protagonist walks a direct route through the city, and he has to keep walking that direct route. I just quote from the script, from the story. Following an unmapped route put him in immediate conflicts with the environment, a city constructed with many walls and fences that prevent access and close down space. The many paths take the weight off the pedestrian, funnels into lines and formations. Yet, thinking on his feet and instructed by a bird, he aims to cut across and bypass the normal routes. He knows what he has to do. With the bird in the bag, he wanders the way the crow flies, willing to overcome any obstacle and cross through anything that obstructs his way, onto, into, out of, through, over, under. Walking to challenge all of these prepositions, he negotiates a new way of walking. And episode 3 was about walking and transcendence. And this was sort of the feature. The story was about 2 people on the island of Andøya, which is in Norway, situated 300 kilometers inside the Arctic Circle. And the 2 protagonists are transforming from humans to non-human. It's a sort of transition experience. The eyes are working differently in this new delicately paced walk. Feet on occasion haltingly stall, but the mind and body keeps moving calmly. Vision is now blurry, but we make out shapes and lights and shadows filtered through our outer skin. We now feel instead of look, listen as observers, and our bodies are field recording. Our tootsies, in a heavy boot, are delicately meditational and carry our souls on an alternative path. So the soles of our feet are the perceptors anchored with animal energy, playfully engaging in new ways of being. This new way of being actually took on a new life for me during the pandemic. After spending years of committing to the worlds of the uncanny, I sort of realised that these otherworldly experiences I was writing into and out of really enabled me to think deeply or deeper around the experience of sentience, sort of feeling and being with an unknown. But I think the change in direction I'm moving into now with my own practice is about the unknown in terms of time on this earth and being a little bit more grounded with the planet. So I've sort of been searching for this connection between walking and sentience, being with the earth. And I've been collaborating with the artist Claire Hind for many years now. And during the pandemic, our public engagement projects too they were cancelled. We were doing this huge project with the Kansas City Institute, and we couldn't go, of course. I mean, obviously, I'm talking from a very privileged position, and I realise that. And so we're not saying that we were the only ones, but it did really make me think about what is really important. We were sort of really influenced by the artist Valley Export and her images from the 1960s from a project called Body Configurations. I won't go into that and give a lecture on that, but we each began to perform a series of actions within our sort of local surroundings. These were intimate experiences for us, but not lonely, but we were alone besides the photographer. The photographer in these projects is my daughter, who have always taken on a walk with me. But we were really interested in what the space, the actual rocks, or the tide witnessed, and of course the camera, because nobody was around. These places were empty. Claire Hind walked in the City of London, wrapping her body in the financial district, and I walked on the North Yorkshire coast in an area of significant geological interest and wrapped my body with rock. Many people during the pandemic have since taken up interests in listening to the sounds of nature, since the way we listened to the world did change for some. Sadly, from my experience, this was a brief moment encountered, because I remember so vividly the time when we all paused and took stock of our place on the earth and this new normal that in the UK particularly has been a catchphrase in the press we're going to be living through this new normal certainly has not been fully realised. Sadly, we've returned to what we had before. The world is loud again, and maybe some of us, I think, are listening a little bit more intently to the earth. I'd like to think so. But I realise here I am speaking from a privileged position. Not everyone's experience of the pandemic is the same, and not everybody could get out and walk. I mean, certainly, I know lots of people that weren't in the same sort of position as me and had really different experience. So I don't want to speak a blanket sort of generalism on the experience of the pandemic. But many of us, have thought about change, how the pandemic has changed the way we work, or the way, certainly for me, the way I walk, and how I wanted to continue to work and walk. Certainly for me, this idea of being grounded close to nature, or what we perceive as nature, with the earth, and connecting to the earth, reminded me of when my daughter was 3 and I was taking her hiking in the mountains to the places I visited myself when I was a child, and she was convinced that the wind told us to turn back because it was howling and it was a little bit scary. And here I recall a line for some text Gary and I wrote from 22-24. She walks and begins to think through her bare feet, pressure moving into the ground while the air above breezing through her ankles and toes. Touch is now her way of being, and this makes her cry. She's coming to understand her emotions this way. Barefooted, the energy of the body and earth suddenly gives strength and meaning. So I began to realise that my desire to have a sentient experience with this earth suggested that the uncanny that I'd been so used to playing with had come closer to me, or at least evolved into that which has always seemed outside myself. That feeling I had when I was 8 in the mountains, that thing I couldn't attain. And so I've been developing this project called To the Rocks over the past 15 months, thinking about that space that I experienced a long time ago, and feels like it's returned. And I'm not a geologist, but I've always been interested in geology and rock formation. But I've never really stopped and had time to take in to physically take it in and embody or listen closely to the environment that I was hiking in, or indeed scrambling in such an intimate way until the pandemic. Normally on a hike, the sounds of the tread, shoes underfoot, are accompanied by what you can hear as you pass by. They pass and you pass things and they disappear. Birds or the waves or rocks falling, etc. But this project, To the Rocks, allowed me to rest, heal, perhaps maybe at the early stages of this project, from the stresses of the pandemic, and listen to nature in ways I'd not done before. A kind of body listening, embodying a rock with a time that I can't possibly know, deep time, layers of the many different time periods in Earth's natural history that go beyond any sense of me and my place in this world. And this was a shift away from the sensory appendage kind of channeling that I'd begun working with in the city, or for many years I was working with as a performer with an audience. I was tuning into the life of the streets with many others. Here I'm sort of on my own and with my daughter, with the landscape. So, I suppose I'm thinking loosely here about ways in which we can move away from the Anthropocene and work towards more of a connection with nature as equal. Maybe there is no, maybe there shouldn't be any separation between us and nature. Does the rock have equal status? These are really early thoughts within a new way of working for me and my walking. And I am on a new journey to try and learn and with others too. And of course, these are not new ideas. Rather, I want to learn from other cultures, to the way in which other cultures have listened to the earth in the past, and what we might do now, carefully coming out of this pandemic, if indeed we ever will fully come out of it. I don't know what that means now, but how do we work with the landscape or the rocks or the earth as an attunement and as performance? So as a way to sort of address this, I share some thoughts and images of this growing project with you. I say growing as I'm now beginning to think about how this might be a collaboration with others, with a geologist, a dramaturg. I've got 2 women that I want to work with, 3 women I want to work with, a geologist based near Leeds, a dramaturg based in Norway and a performer in Brazil, and we're trying to think through ways in which we are making connections between or across nature with nature. But I'm sort of thinking about ways in which we can make meaningful experiences for communities, because I realize that this is just me alone having photographs taken of me in wonderful, beautiful landscapes. But for now, this is where I'm at. This is some performance text that I'm in the middle of writing and some slides of that project. I am a performer walking, the sentient shapeshifter, gathering energy from geological matter. Walking is also about finding moments of stillness with the materials of the landscape I walk in. Now, rather than collect pebbles, I hold my body close, mould into their shape and mimic their direction, understand textures through intimate contact. I scatter across a bay from rock to scar, claiming a space that connects me and my finds to the universe and the seismic forces that split visible time and space. I lay across this rock here a Romph porphyry. It's a Norwegian rock, deposited from the last ice age. And there's a kind of attention to the earth, to the stones that I'm falling in love with. My imagination is shaped by the temporal environment. I let the water wash over me, await the incoming tide, and be still, silent, channeling a different kind of time. And there's a kind of attention to the earth when the water covers and shapes the stones that I am falling in love with, and I want to feel the rock's vibrations. And there is also another rock that I am drawn to, a rock that enchants. From the North Yorkshire coast to the South coast in Cornwall. I hold and lay with material that moved upward. Scratches, the veins move upward. And there's a kind of attention to the earth, the stones, the feel of the different type of rock that I am falling in love with. This is serpentine rock on the Lizard Peninsula. This red and green material has, in geological time, moved up from the Earth's mantle. I lay my body close to a time I can't possibly know. Yet, there is a space to listen, a tune, and experience enchantment, or perhaps a re-enchantment, as my colleague Claire MacDonald recently reminded me of. Embody deep time. Cwmidwyl in the Glyderau, known as the Glyders in North Wales, is volcanic, sedimentary rock, later eroded by glacial movement to form a semi-circular valley, leaving behind a heap of boulders. The word glyder derives from the Welsh word glydau, meaning a heap of stones, a heartening heap. Cwmidwyl in the same base, in the same mountain range, and the mountain of Penny Old Wen in view. I rest and hold my body close to this land, laying on lakeshore pebbles. I listen. I am Claire sentient. And there's a kind of attention to the earth, the stones, the glacial erratics carried by ice and left to rest for a while, that I'm falling in love with. Yet I realise I cannot hold on to simply a romantic experience here. There's a responsibility that comes with laying with the planet and acknowledging that we are part of it and that it is moving. I heard very recently that mountains are moving all of the time. They sway, moving gently from the seismic rhythms of the earth. The Matterhorn vibrates every 2 seconds from the world's ambient energy. The hum has been described as the song of the mountain. It's low frequency. We can't hear it, but it is there. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So I just put that together as maybe a provocation to think about ways in which these ideas might connect to other people. People might have much more knowledge than me in this area. I'm realizing that I am sort of coming out of a pandemic as an artist that has support from a university. So I'm lucky that I can do these fantastic projects and be supported. So I understand that privilege. So I suppose, Babak, I want to know how you handle this cafe from now and how we move forward. What is there to chat about? I mean, I could ask questions, or you could ask questions, or I could hand it over to others. I'm not sure.
Here I am again. I'm here. I'm sorry for the confusion. The system attributed me the name Babak for a moment, but I have changed it in my dual
Yes, I
identity.
thought so. I thought so, but I thought I made the mistake.
And
Thank
I
you
see that Rodolphus the Great is also back to his human
Great.
dimension. Thank you so much, Claire. You turned our cafe into a restaurant because now we have a banquet of the dishes and topics that we can enjoy talking about. And I see that there are various ideas, feedback, comments in the chat. And for me personally, I think it's wonderful how you make this link between where the uncanny is coming from, the morbid, the dark side of the romantic period, but was also the origin, where it was also emerging walking as a creative form. It's wonderful female writers and as well people like Edgar Allan Poe with the wandering the wandering characters in the night and Baudelaire with his flaneur, which was also lost in a known world. And how you connected this with a very ecological, contemporary perspective of connecting with the earth, literally bringing our body back onto the earth and listening with the whole body to what is vibrating around us. On first sight, there's so much to talk about. Is there somebody who would like to give some comment and feedback to start with?
Like I say, there's loads in Heidegger on this. I put a little bit in it, but here's quite a good thing. It's all about homelessness being his translation of the uncanny. And by reflecting upon tomorrow, we arouse the healing power of yesterday, understood correctly and appropriated aright. On such ways, we first attain the today that we must live through, endure, between the past and the future. Such living through helps us to become earnest in what holds its position against all change. And he said this wonderful image of what was it? Abraham a Sancta Clara. And this is a quote from her. Come hither, you silver white swans, who with your snow-defying wings row round and about upon the water. And what he's saying essentially, if I can find it, it's emigrated from what there is. Oh, sorry, I can't find it. Oh, no. Anyhow, he puts it in. He puts it in. Okay, I've got it. Sorry to hold you. In other words, the swan is a word picture of what abides in the midst of temporal change. So it's like working with the word picture in the midst of temporal change. So it's quite a big thing, and he uses this against the idea of Dasein, which is the understanding of the meaning of life that we get on our deathbed. So the only way that we can resolve that is through the uncanny, and he uses that word, the uncanny, as the sole domain of the artist. So the artist can inform humanity of the uncanny, and that Yeah, I can't remember. Right.
I think I think that's absolutely brilliant. I really, really generous of you to share the stuff from Heidegger. I'm not a Heidegger. Is that what you say? I need to read more. Yeah, I think that's truly fascinating because I am aware that I might use that term loosely, but I have usually related that work more to the sort of Nicholas Royal camp of sort of post-Freudian, post-Lacan sort of thinking on it. So that's really useful because I have struggled with it in the later years of my sort of career with that word, because it always keeps coming back to, for me, it always keeps coming back to the same thing. And actually, I think it can mean something quite different. And this idea of the artist holding that territory, I think, is certainly fascinating to me. So thank you.
We've seen a book called Heidegger on Death, a critical theological essay.
Brilliant. Thank you. Wonderful. Thanks.
Can I say something? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things you said in the early part of your talk was playing with the uncanny. I think you just possibly meant playing with the uncanny, but what I heard actually was, does the uncanny want to play with us? Because we're so bloody serious nowadays. Where is, does the uncanny, does it want to play with us?
I'd like to think so. I mean, the thing that I was talking about when the city speaks back, when things start to happen through coincidence, the uncanny is found when you sort of open up spaces, I think, to let it in. And I think that seriousness that you're talking about can be tackled through play. And I sort of said something earlier about I'm playful and humorous, but I do take play seriously. And I think not enough of us are playing, whether that's serious play or, you know, humorous play. We're not playing in the ways that we could play at the moment. But I think a lot has happened, right, for us to take a very different view of the world. I don't know. I mean, I've always played. I've always sort of playful way of being with every situation, whether that's a staff meeting or presentation or a performance. I think it's just something in my sort of nature, but not everybody has that sentiment at all. I don't know whether it comes with a particular type. It's an attitude, isn't it, as well as a state of mind to things, perhaps. But no, that's a really interesting point.
I do have a question. Well, maybe it's not a question, it's just more of a consideration, really. It struck me when you said about the gorilla and the dream that you had as a child, then that it was uncanny on the sense that a dream can be only be recollect in that sense. But if we think about the dream itself, when you have a dream, it's very vivid. If it's a vivid dream, it's something that you actually live in that specific moment. I woke up last night shouting because something was happening during my dreams. And then to me, it's part of what I'm studying as well. To me, is living in the moment is something that relate right now, okay? But at the same time, the present is such something immediate that disappear in the past, and then we can only recollect it. And then leaving become uncanny to a certain extent. And then I find it very interesting because thinking about what reality is in the sense, and then actually dream and living can become the same human approach to things. I don't know, which create the creative thinking of an artist in this case. Well, it's not really a question. I wanted to throw these things into the mix.
I suppose in a way I've been working through dreams for, I don't know, 12 odd years or more. That's how I've made work. And creatively this doesn't seem to be a separation, but that my reality in the world in which I'm given to work in does separate out those experiences. That memory I had as a gorilla as a child is more vivid than some of my childhood memories of waking life. So I think a way for me to think about it is there is a difference between sleeping life and waking life. The Dream Yards project certainly tried to encourage people to sleep more. Sleep more. We sort of had this theory that we were working with, that we'd worked with a scientist on this, that you sleep in order to you sleep in order to dream, and dreaming makes you sleep better. So actually, dreaming is a really good, healthy benefit to your waking life, and that if you start to separate out these two worlds apart, then the dream doesn't become important. The dream is just whatever. But I think the sort of old school of thought where you could interpret dreams and somebody would tell you what they mean was not the sort of area that we were interested in necessarily, but rather that you had the dream, that you felt something, and that it had some sort of importance to you, regardless of what the interpretation was, meant that you actually slept well. So we worked with a sleep scientist that said, if you can recall your dreams, it means that you've had a good night's sleep. And that was a different way of thinking for us. So all of the audience members that came on the walk, we were trying to encourage them to dream more. So we did lots of different techniques that helped them recall and remember their dreams, which then in turn could help them to have a better night's sleep. So we were thinking more about the health benefits of sleep being really important to the waking life. But, there are many times where I've been teaching my students and I've taught them off the back of a dream. I said, well, actually, literally, I'm teaching you today. I had an idea last night in my dream, so I'm going to test it. And the students tend to love that and start to realise that as artists, we have permission, well, not permission, it's the wrong word, but have sort of a faith that territory works to some extent. But equally, I've also had really like Groundhog Day dreams where I've already taught the class, I wake up exhausted and I go to teach the class and I dreamt about the whole class the night before. So I suppose it depends which headspace that you're in, really. Yeah. But I suppose for me and sort of this shift that I've got between me and material, rock, we're going into sort of, sort of the triple O theory. Any theorists out there that understand the triple O, because it's not, I know it exists and I've read a little bit about it, but this idea that objects or material think or feel or have some form of energy, to me is a sort of really exciting world, as equally as exciting as the dream, that somehow we have a relationship to rock. But but what I've experienced in my life working with hikers and walkers and scramblers and boulderers is that mountains and rocks are those spaces normally that are conquered, and that people name boulders after them, or they seek out a boulder that hasn't been climbed before and conquer it and name it. And I'm probably speaking ill of boulderers, but for me, there seems to be something missing with our relationship to how we work with mountains and rock. For me, it's not about achievement of climbing and getting to the top. I'm trying to find ways of being with the earth and not wanting to sound too mystic. So I am already sort of acknowledging the fact that this is really new territory for me.
Yeah. Claire, when you're talking about dreams, I read as well in the comments something about listening to the spirits, also in relation to Vatican College. Then the whole world, the dimension of listening to spirits, being in contact with spirits, is also a part of dreaming, and connects us not only with the space but also with another time, with the ancestral knowledge. Deeper knowledge, and as you have put it as well, deep time, which is very present in your work. Fred, I see that you're with us as well, and you're working very much with deep time. Maybe you can tell something about how you relate in your work with deep time?
Well, in fact, I had a question. I would like to know if the gorilla was dangerous, if you was afraid of the gorilla, and if at the end your experience in nature or knowing better of nature makes the gorilla a friend, really, because I believe that when we are afraid of what we don't know. And more we know nature, I hope that the gorilla can become really, really a friend. And yeah, so I would like to know how you have this gorilla in your mind along your journey. Yeah, and if the relation change with this gorilla.
Yeah, because we tend to other based on fear, right? And then once things are othered, they stay othered in culture for a very, very long time. And I also think the same of places like mountainscapes. A lot of people will acknowledge that they aren't for the mountains. They can't go to the mountains. They're not accessible. They don't see themselves as people that can, or people are frightened of those spaces because I think culturally they've been deemed as something that you need to conquer and have skill in order to be present. But the same with animals and creatures. The gorilla is the idea of fear. But I think what I was doing at the time with the gorilla, it was my dream, but we were also Gary Winters and I were playing with two figures that would become really interested in cultural history. King Kong, who we know of, he's been pastiched over and over again, and also King Lear. King Lear was this really scary dad who divided his kingdom up between his family, and God forbid they disagreed with him or didn't tell him that they didn't love him. So as a feminist thinking about embodying the gorilla, it was a sort of empowering time for a woman to take on these patriarchal roles and embody the gorilla in a playful, more sort of melancholic way. And it's hard to describe the figure of Kong Lear unless you've seen the work, because there's a whole body of work that comes with that gorilla that is really supportive of, or really taps into this idea that we're fearing the other all of the time, and that we need to sort of find different ways of being with the world, I think.
Claire, I see that there were some questions in the chat from Catherine, from Viv, from Sabrati. So let's go have a look to them.
Okay.
So Catherine asks, how do you stop yourself from being absorbed by the uncanny and keep in touch with reality?
Oh. What is reality? I suppose. I mean, my reality, day-to-day reality for me is really managed well, because my responsibilities are always about teaching others. So my day job, I suppose, is about pedagogy and learning and teaching, and my research, my evening job or my weekend job, I suppose, is this uncanny world. So for me, it's always about slippage, where you give this sort of space for one world to slip into another, but you acknowledge that those worlds are perceived differently, but at the same time you can have a great deal of respect for an idea if you allow those worlds to come together. I'm just fortunate to have a job that makes me feel grounded. I always have to be with reality because I'm responsible for others. I don't know whether that answers your question. Is there another question? Is there one here that says, I love the work you're doing with rocks. Can you say a bit more about how you feel or what you experience when you're draped over it? Shall I answer that one, do you think?
Yeah, what I wanted to say was I actually, as you were answering other questions, I wondered if the mountains were a way of grounding yourself away from the uncanny.
Yeah, there's a paradox there, I think. You're right. I suppose for me it's wrapped up in nostalgia. Those times for me as a child were really important. to go. I mean, we didn't live in the mountains. We lived in a town, in a city, and it wasn't beautiful in that sense. It wasn't mountainous. So this was always an escape. This is always somewhere to go that was different, and to be with family, and be with the mountains. But I always felt slightly other when I was there. There was always something there that I couldn't put my finger on, and my mind would wander, and I would always walk away from my parents. I would play alone. I would take myself off like most children do, and sort of make believe play. There was something about that space that was a big amphitheatre, a massive space to play, that actually brought me closer to these sorts of worlds of the other and the unknown, that whilst on one level I was grounded because we were walking and we were close to the earth, I was also in some sort of highly theatricalized imagination mindset.
Thanks, yeah, that makes sense.
Viv is asking, I love the work you are doing with rocks. Can you say a bit more about how you feel, what you experience when you lie draped over the rock? I know you have described it, but I'd like to hear more.
Yeah, strangely, it's becoming a little bit addictive. I have to be honest. I can't wait to go out and do it more, because there really is. Because I've done scrambling courses, I've done hiking courses, I've been taught certain techniques of how to get up a mountain and spot for others and use ropes and stuff. And this is a completely different experience that feels meditative, but it also feels playful, but also it sometimes hurts. I mean, on the Lizard Peninsula, those rocks are really sharp. And they're cold. That was in February and it was freezing, but after a while you start to realize the reality of what it is that you're doing and how often you don't do these sorts of things, that you start to attune and become quite connected to the task in hand. And it's actually really beautiful. It's wet, on the day I was there anyway, it was wet. It feels different. You can hear things differently, certainly because of the angle of the body or where you have your ear in one of the sort of holes in the rocks. Things are definitely experienced in a completely different way, but also because normally walking for me, you just keep going and you walk, and if you only stop to take a break for a cup of tea or you pack lunch or whatever. But this is a completely different way of walking for me. The only difficulty with it, that something interrupts that space, and that's the art project itself. And this is where there's another paradox, because I've always been with someone else doing this project to get those photographs and to share them as art. So there's a sense in which I'm thinking, well, is some of this slightly contrived because I'm doing this? I might lie with a rock because some of those pictures I'm lying with a rock for maybe about 40 minutes, and we take some shots and then back off a bit, but there's always someone present. I'm thinking maybe the person that's taking the photographs, like my daughter or my friend Claire, for example, is witnessing another sort of having a different kind of experience. And I think what I'm trying to say is that at the moment I've just been doing this project for me and for those images, but I've really truly experienced something extraordinary. What I'd really like to do in the next phase of this project is look to ways in which this can be opened out for others to share and have workshop experiences. And I am aware that people are already working semantically with landscape. This is not new at all. But I think for me, I'm trying to work out at the moment how this feeling, this sort of connection with these rocks can be explored and felt by others.
Thanks very much. I think that you're probably not doing yourself any favors by thinking it's all about you, because for me seeing those images of you draped over the rock were really powerful, and I had a very strong response. Like, I just want to go out and find a rock and lie on it, So I think that there is a sort of a You know, there is a third person involvement in a strange way by viewing it.
Oh,
Because,
good. Oh,
yeah.
that's really, really good to hear. I mean, I'd like them to be provocative and also inviting. And my daughter started mimicking me, and then she started hugging the rocks, and that was lovely to see. And it is a wonderful feeling, especially when you get a rock that you feel like you perfectly fit into and onto. So I am in that moment where I'm still exploring it. So to hear that sort of feedback is brilliant for me, and really useful. I think it puts women into the landscape in ways that we've not really seen before, and I think it shifts us away from a particular gaze, and I'm quite excited by that too. But also excited by the fact that this is a project that I probably have longed to do for a long time, because I've always been interested in rock. I'm just so used to going to a beach and bringing a rock home, or when I walk on the North Yorkshire coast, I see a lot of people with hammers, and it disturbs me a bit because they hammer away and get the rock, and people are always taking. And in a way, I don't want to do that. I say let's take a photograph of it instead. It's just that this time I'm on it. So I don't know. Let's see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we have another question of Samprati, which actually connects very well with what Viv was asking. And she says, I love the idea of the uncanny as not necessarily something that needs to be feared, but as something with possibilities of new forms of listening and feeling, and somewhere also perhaps being okay with not knowing entirely.
I absolutely adore that idea, that it's okay to be in that space of the not knowing. I've sort of, that really excites me, because everything, I sort of try and work against things that are planned. I'm a great believer in spontaneity and the unknown. But also there's always risks and dangers that come with that. But I'm also really into that as well. And I think there are ways in which we can truly try and understand the uncanny outside of the sort of psychoanalytical world in which we've been presented. I'm not anti-psychoanalysis. In fact, I borrow it from time to time when it suits me as an artist. And I think a lot of us do that with different theories. But I do believe that we're in some sort of strange loop where that word is even used now as an equivalent to ironic, or, oh yes, it was uncanny that I met you on the street yesterday. And I want to say, well, it's not uncanny, it was just a coincidence. Or I don't know, so that word somewhere has got lost between, somewhere between a very, very sort of everyday language that we're used to using and a language that is attached to fear and horror movies. I just think there's a way in which we can connect more viscerally and in more sentient ways, that allows the uncanny a healthier space, really. That's equivalent to the dream, really, but in waking life.
Bob, I see that you added some comments. Would you like to elaborate on that one?
Yeah, sure. Oh, am I on? Yeah. Okay. Now, I've just got a good quote from Derrida. Nothing is less reliable, nothing is less clear today than the word archive. So this is, I found it's all in German. I found my Valley Export catalogue, and she's right there with Gina Payne. Gina Payne was the one who took the razor blade and cut just above her upper lids, below her brows, 2 big cuts. That was her thing. And that Valley Export takes violence as a sort of springboard, but working about the same time that Gina was. So they were the male actionists in Vienna, or Schwarzkopfler and all those guys, but there were also women who were working with psychological. One of the interesting things is, let's see if I can find this bit, a quote that sorry to be, this is a little bit, it says in the catalogue about her, it's central to Valley Export's great achievement that she finds continuously new motifs for her chosen themes and new fitting modes of expressions in great number and diversity about the image of the woman and its incorporation, modification and transformation through the architecture or landscape, but also the psychological states of injury and violence, as well as about disturbing perceptions of reality and forms of linguistic expression. So she was quite a, and she also says that she has been a pioneer in mapping our culture's physical and mental locations and the politicized nature of even imagined geographies. So she's quite, I'm ever so pleased you picked up on her as a seminal influence, because it's not really recognised, I think, here in England, the significance of the Viennese school in terms of performance art. I guess because it's kind of scary.
Yeah, and I think political is also right. You know, I don't think Claire and I are doing the same thing in our work, but I think we are truly inspired by that particular work of a generation, indeed, and how we might speak slightly differently now. But certainly, you're right. Thank you for finding that as well. I'd like to know a little bit more about the work that you've just found. I think.
Can I just, sorry to burst in. I've just got sacked from my job at 30 years at the Royal Festival Hall for talking about performance art. I've just been sacked. Yeah, sacked.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry to hear that.
I got excluded. I got excluded from talking about sex in my psychotherapy group. Everywhere I go as a performance artist, I'm excluded. I can't find an area.
So I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah. Gosh, that's awful. Right. Well, I'm really grateful for what you've brought to the table this evening. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I've got a daughter at home that I need to go and look after and cook for.
So maybe
I've got to go and be a mum now.
Yes. Maybe we go for the last question. Does anybody has a last comment, feedback to Claire, or wants to bring in something that isn't discussed yet before we?
Sorry, I know I've said something already, but you obviously will have heard of the Uncanny Valley syndrome, which is how people react to non-human AIs, robots, etc., which are supposed to be human, which look to all intents and purposes like human, but which we know aren't. So how does what you haven't talked about, I don't know whether you would quickly, is about the relationship of the uncanny and developments in artificial intelligence?
Well, I can't talk about artificial intelligence, but I have thought about exactly what you've said in relation to a rock. Because I mean, a rock is a rock, or is it? I think, we might decide that it has no intelligence. It's just there. It's just present. It's part of Earth's sort of movement. But in actual fact, there's something really interesting about the fact that we don't really know what a rock thinks or feels. We just assume that it doesn't, and so there's all of these sort of open questions about our relationship to Earth's materials and what we're actually doing to the Earth. And what I love about these projects that are just emerging for me is that there is a really nice relationship to wandering and belonging, and this idea that we think we belong somewhere, or a place is ours, and we conquer a place and we name a place. Sort of quite, it's problematic for me, and obviously for obvious reasons. But the irony, the world, the Earth is constantly moving. Plate tectonics, or the way in which the Earth moves, is the plates are known as wanderers, but the Earth is always moving. It has this other deeper sense of itself more than we can comprehend. And I think those are the spaces that I find fascinating, that I can't speak on behalf of. We can only imagine what that sort of material experiences in the world. But I will come back to this idea that I sort of said earlier, and I'm not the first person to think this, that if we think that there's a separation between ourselves and nature, then we're always going to think differently about the world and other things and other people. Whereas if we start to make connections between us as nature with nature, then we might start to begin to think about the world and the way in which we live our lives in that world differently. I know that doesn't do anything to us, to the AI that you're talking about, because it really isn't my field. So I hope I've answered some of that question. And there's so many people that have put some comments in the chat that's fantastic. Like, yes, I do know the work of Louise Ann Wilson. She's fantastic. Thank you. And some of you have been really generous with the things that I should look at and read and for the group to read. So I'm hoping there's a way I can save these comments and maybe respond in another space and time. Andrew, I don't know whether that's possible, because there's lots of brilliant things that are said that I could return to, certainly. And yes, there's a Dartington residency I see. Somebody's mentioned the poetry residency, but there's also a really interesting semantic conference coming up at Dartington in this month about sentience, I think, and our place with the environment. I've probably not worded that in the way that they have in the conference, but it certainly looks interesting.
I'm sure that many of the topics you brought in will keep inspiring us to talk throughout the summer with other guests, and we hope to see you there as well, Claire, on one of these for cafes. And thank you so much, Claire, for sharing.
You're more than welcome. It's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it. I'm sorry I have to go. You know, I want to go back and spend the evening with my daughter now, and she'll want to know how it's gone. She's doing her homework. She's got exams. So.
Yes. Thank you very much, Claire. And
thank you. I really appreciate it. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
You all for being here. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.